March 18, 1943, Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands. Captain Hiroshi Yoshimura stood on the bridge of the transport Ikoku Maru, watching the last of his cargo cranes swing ammunition crates into the hold. Around him in the anchorage, 17 other merchant ships prepared for the convoy run back to Yokohama. His manifest listed rubber from Malaya, tin from Thailand, and 10,000 barrels of aviation fuel loaded in drums. Resources the Empire needed desperately. Resources he had delivered dozens of times before. 3 months earlier, Japanese Naval General Staff had assured merchant captains that American submarine activity remained concentrated near major bases, Pearl Harbor, Fremantle. Submarines were expensive machines requiring extensive maintenance, lengthy transit times, and support infrastructure. The vastness of the Pacific, staff officers insisted, made comprehensive submarine patrols impossible. Perhaps 20 or 30 American boats operated at any given moment across millions of square miles of ocean. The odds of encountering one approached nil. What Captain Yoshimura did not know, what Japanese intelligence had failed to comprehend, was that America had built an entirely new class of submarine designed specifically to control the Pacific. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Gato-Class, 77 boats already commissioned by March 1943, with more sliding down shipways every month. Not 20 or 30 submarines prowling the Pacific, but hundreds, each capable of remaining at sea for 75 days, each carrying 24 torpedoes, each hunting across patrol areas that formed an invisible net strangling the Empire. When the torpedo from USS Wahoo struck Ikoku Maru's stern at 06:15 hours, Captain Yoshimura's understanding of submarine warfare shattered as completely as his ship's hull. The explosion lifted the transport's fantail from the water, severed her rudder, and ignited the aviation fuel stored in afterholds. Within 8 minutes, 3 more torpedoes slammed home. Ikoku Maru broke in half and sank in 12 minutes, taking Yoshimura and 400 crew with her. USS Wahoo, a Gato-Class submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton, had been waiting submerged at periscope depth since midnight. She was one of 11 Gato-Class boats operating in the Central Pacific that week alone. 11 submarines, where Japanese planners believed perhaps 3 or 4 might be present. The mathematics of Japan's defeat were being written not in carrier battles or amphibious assaults, but in the industrial capacity of American shipyards producing submarines faster than Japanese intelligence could track them. The Gato-Class submarine represented American industrial engineering at its most pragmatic and devastating. Designed in 1941 as war approached, the Gato-Class prioritized range, reliability, and production efficiency over experimental technologies. The specifications were straightforward: 311 feet 6 inches in length, 2,424 tons surface displacement, 4 diesel engines generating 5,400 horsepower for surface running, electric motors for submerged operations. Maximum speed 20 knots surfaced, 9 knots submerged. Diving depth officially 300 feet, though experienced commanders routinely exceeded 400 feet when pursued. Most critically, the Gato-Class carried 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, 10 tubes forward, 6 aft, with reloads stored throughout the boat. A single Gato-Class submarine on a typical 60-day patrol could sink a dozen merchant ships, cripple a cruiser, and return to base with torpedoes remaining. When 40 or 50 Gato-Class boats deployed simultaneously across the Pacific, the cumulative impact became catastrophic for Japanese logistics. The genius of the Gato-Class design lay not in revolutionary technology, but in manufacturability. Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, designed the class for rapid construction using prefabricated sections and standardized components. Welding replaced riveting wherever possible, cutting construction time dramatically. 4 shipyards received contracts: Electric Boat in Groton, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California, Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, whose completed submarines traveled down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, then through the Panama Canal to the Pacific. At peak production in 1943 and 44, these yards delivered 2 Gato-Class submarines per month. The construction time from keel laying to commissioning averaged 9 to 10 months. Compare this to Japan's submarine construction. The Imperial Navy completed approximately 40 submarines total between 1942 and 1945, prioritizing large fleet submarines designed for scouting and surface engagement rather than merchant interdiction. Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized supporting the decisive fleet battle, not strangling enemy logistics. This doctrinal blindness, combined with catastrophic underestimation of American production capacity, doomed Japan's merchant marine. Japanese naval intelligence in early 1942 compiled reports estimating American submarine strength at approximately 60 boats in the Pacific, divided between older S-class submarines operating from Dutch Harbor and Brisbane, and newer fleet boats based at Pearl Harbor. These estimates proved accurate for December 1941. What intelligence analysts failed to anticipate was the scale and speed of American submarine construction. By December 1942-51, Gato-class submarines had commissioned. By December 1943, 77 Gato-class boats operated across the Pacific, joined by the first of the improved Balao-class submarines, nearly identical to the Gato design, but with thicker pressure hulls, allowing deeper diving. The mathematical progression should have terrified Japanese planners. 60 American submarines in December 1941, 120 in December 1942, over 200 by December 1943, over 250 by mid-1944. Each new boat represented another patrol area covered, another convoy route interdicted, another section of ocean transformed from safe passage to deadly gauntlet. Japanese merchant captains began reporting encounters that defied the intelligence estimates. Convoys attacked off Formosa, then hit again 2 days later off the Philippines. Ships torpedoed in the Makassar Strait, then survivors rescued by vessels torpedoed the following week in the Celebes Sea. Tankers sunk departing Balikpapan, their replacements attacked before reaching Truk. The Americans, captains reported in increasingly desperate messages, were everywhere. Captain Tatsuo Tsukudo, master of the tanker Kenyo-maru, survived 3 submarine attacks between January and May 1943. The first attack, off Mindanao, came from a surfaced submarine firing deck guns at night. Tsukudo escaped by emergency maneuvering and smokescreen. The second attack, in the Banda Sea, consisted of 2 torpedoes fired at dawn. Both missed as Tsukudo turned into their tracks, passing alongside his hull. The third attack, approaching Truk, succeeded. 4 torpedoes struck Kenyo-maru amidships at 1400 hours. She sank in 7 minutes. Tsukudo and 23 crew survived in a lifeboat, picked up by a destroyer 30 hours later. In his report to Combined Fleet Headquarters, Tsukudo stated his certainty that 3 different submarines had attacked his ship over 4 months. The attacking profiles differed. The first boat had operated aggressively on the surface at night. The second had fired from periscope depth at dawn. The third had demonstrated patience, tracking Kenyo-maru for hours before firing at optimal range. 3 submarines, 3 separate attack profiles, 4 months, 3,000 miles of ocean. To Tsukudo, this suggested either impossibly bad luck or a submarine force far larger than intelligence estimates indicated. Japanese naval staff dismissed his conclusion. The Pacific remained too vast for comprehensive coverage. American submarines required extensive maintenance after patrols, limiting the number operational at any time. Tsukudo's experience reflected unfortunate coincidence, not systematic submarine coverage. The actual explanation was simpler and more devastating. Tsukudo had encountered 3 different Gato-class submarines. USS Guardfish off Mindanao, USS Gar in the Banda Sea, USS Tunny near Truk. All three boats operated simultaneously on overlapping patrol schedules that ensured continuous coverage of major shipping routes. The patrol schedule itself revealed American operational sophistication that Japanese planners failed to comprehend. Gato-class submarines typically deployed on 60 to 75-day war patrols. 15 days transit from base to patrol area, 45 days on station, 15 days return transit. While one boat patrolled, another transited outbound to relieve her, a third transited inbound after completing patrol, and a fourth underwent refit and crew rest at base. 4 submarines rotated through a single patrol area, ensuring one boat always hunted there. By mid-1943, American Submarine Command had established 23 patrol areas covering the major shipping routes between Japan and the southern resource area: the Philippines, Formosa Strait, Luzon Strait, the Nansei Shoto, the Bungo and Key Suidos, the approaches to Truk, Palau and Rabaul. Each area rotated 4 submarines, 92 boats to maintain continuous coverage of the Empire's maritime lifelines. The Gato-class production schedule delivered sufficient submarines to implement this strategy by spring 1943, transforming the Pacific from open ocean to killing ground. The industrial comparison between American and Japanese submarine construction revealed the asymmetry that would decide the war. Electric Boat Company's Groton facility employed 12,000 workers at peak production. The yard maintained 8 building ways, allowing simultaneous construction of multiple submarines at various completion stages. Prefabricated sections arrived by rail from subcontractors across New England, electric motors from General Electric, diesel engines from Fairbanks Morse and General Motors, torpedoes from the Naval Torpedo Station at Newport, Rhode Island, radar sets from Radio Corporation of America. The entire industrial base of the United States contributed components flowing to final assembly. Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company's inland location demonstrated American logistical creativity. Completed submarines, unable to reach the ocean directly, were launched into the Manitowoc River, then navigated down the Mississippi River system to New Orleans. The journey covered 1,900 miles through locks and channels too shallow for full surfacing, requiring specialized river pilots and careful ballast management. Yet Manitowoc delivered 28 Gato-class submarines between 1942 and 1944, each boat traveling from the Wisconsin heartland to the Pacific Ocean via America's inland waterways. Japanese submarine construction could not match this scale. Kobe, Kawasaki and Mitsubishi yards produced submarines using traditional shipbuilding methods with minimal prefabrication. Steel shortages restricted production. Skilled labor shortages slowed construction, as experienced workers were drafted into military service. Most critically, Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized large fleet boats, displacing 3,000 tons, designed for long-range reconnaissance and surface engagement. These submarines required 18 to 24 months to complete, compared to 9 months for a Gato-class boat. Japan could not build submarines fast enough to replace losses, much less expand fleet strength. The operational capabilities of the Gato-class submarines extended far beyond what Japanese naval planners considered possible for a submarine operating in the vast Pacific. The fuel capacity defined everything. Each Gato-class boat carried 94,000 gallons of diesel fuel in ballast tanks lining the hull. This provided a range of 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots surfaced speed, or 48 days of continuous patrol at economical cruising speeds. The boats could transit 7,000 miles from Pearl Harbor to the South China Sea, patrol for 30 days, and return to base without refueling. This range transformed submarine warfare. Japanese submarines operating from Truk or Kwajalein could reach American shipping lanes near Hawaii or Australia, but required extensive time in transit and could remain on station only briefly before fuel concerns forced their return. American Gato-class boats operating from Pearl Harbor, Midway, Brisbane, or Fremantle covered the entire Western Pacific with weeks of patrol time in Japanese waters. The fuel capacity translated directly into merchant ships sunk. More time on station meant more targets encountered, more attacks executed, more tonnage sent to the bottom. The living conditions aboard a Gato-Class submarine during a 75-day patrol tested human endurance. 80 officers and men crowded into a hull 300 feet long and 27 feet in diameter. The interior space, filled with machinery, torpedoes, food stores, and fuel tanks, left minimal room for crew accommodations. Men slept in bunks stacked 3 high, with bunks in the torpedo rooms surrounded by the 21-foot-long weapons that defined the boat's purpose. No privacy existed, no quiet. Diesel engines roared when surfaced. Electric motors hummed when submerged. Air conditioning struggled against tropical heat that turned the interior into a sauna where temperatures routinely exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Fresh water remained strictly rationed. Each man received perhaps 2 gallons per day for drinking, cooking, and minimal washing. Showers were forbidden except on special occasions when the captain authorized brief freshwater rinses. Men worked, and slept in clothes soaked with sweat, developing rashes and skin infections that the pharmacist's mate treated with limited medical supplies. The boats carried enough food for 90 days if carefully managed, but fresh vegetables and fruit spoiled within 2 weeks, leaving crews subsisting on canned goods, dried beans, and dehydrated potatoes. Yet these conditions bred extraordinary camaraderie and operational effectiveness. Submarine crews volunteered for the service, understanding the risks and hardships. The submarine force attracted aggressive, independent personalities who thrived on the autonomy submarine command provided. Unlike surface ships, where admirals directed fleet movements, submarine commanders operated alone, making tactical decisions without higher authority intervening. This attracted the most capable officers, who in turn trained crews to exceptional standards. The result was a force that consistently exceeded performance expectations, despite operating equipment that pushed human endurance limits. The torpedo armament distinguished the Gato-Class from earlier American submarines. 24 torpedoes represented unprecedented firepower for a submarine. Older S-class boats carried 12 torpedoes total. The Gato-Class doubled that capacity, with 10 tubes forward, 4 tubes aft, and reloads stored throughout the boat. Reloading required 3 hours of exhausting work by the torpedo gang, manhandling 3,000-pound weapons through narrow spaces using chain hoists and muscle power. Yet, experienced crews could reload all tubes and prepare for a second attack within 4 hours of the initial salvo, allowing submarines to engage multiple targets during a single contact. The torpedo loadout reflected lessons learned from early war patrols. Boats typically carried 20 Mark 14 torpedoes, with high explosive warheads for attacks on merchant ships, and 4 Mark 18 electric torpedoes for attacks requiring stealth. The Mark 18 ran on electric batteries rather than compressed air, producing no wake and remaining virtually undetectable. Though slower and shorter ranged than the Mark 14, the Mark 18 proved ideal for daylight periscope attacks on alert targets or for final approaches against targets already aware of the submarine's presence. USS Flasher, commissioned in September 1943, demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of a Gato-Class submarine with experienced crew and functional torpedoes. Under Commander Reuben Whittaker, Flasher completed 6 war patrols between March 1944 and August 1945, sinking 21 ships totaling 100,000 tons. This made Flasher the highest-scoring American submarine in terms of tonnage destroyed, slightly exceeding USS Tautog's total. On Flasher's third patrol in December 1944, Whittaker intercepted a Japanese convoy in the South China Sea consisting of 3 large tankers escorted by destroyers. The tankers, Omuro-san Maru, Ottawa-san Maru, and Arita Maru, carried critical fuel oil from the Dutch East Indies to Japan. Each displaced over 10,000 tons fully loaded. Losing all 3 would cost Japan nearly 30,000 tons of shipping and hundreds of thousands of barrels of desperately needed fuel. Whittaker tracked the convoy for 6 hours, noting the escort pattern and timing his approach to strike at dusk when visibility favored the submarine. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. At 1800 hours on December 4th, Flasher reached attack position at range 3,000 yards. Whittaker fired 6 torpedoes, 2 at each tanker. All 6 torpedoes functioned perfectly. The first tanker, Omurozan Maru, took 2 hits amidships. She exploded in a massive fireball as the torpedoes detonated her cargo of aviation gasoline. The explosion was so violent that her bow and stern sections were blown 100 feet into the air, breaking the ship completely apart. She sank in under 3 minutes. The second tanker, Otovasan Maru, also took 2 hits. Her cargo of crude oil erupted in flames that spread across the water, turning the sea into an inferno. The tanker burned for 20 minutes before her hull plating failed and she sank by the stern. The third tanker, Arita Maru, took 1 hit forward. The explosion ruptured fuel tanks and started fires, but the ship remained afloat. The escorting destroyers immediately began a depth charge attack on Flasher's estimated position, forcing Whittaker to dive deep and withdraw. 3 hours later, after the destroyers had moved off, Flasher surfaced and pursued the damaged Arita Maru, which had attempted to flee under reduced power while her crew fought fires. Whittaker closed to 1,500 yards and fired 3 more torpedoes. 2 struck home. Arita Maru broke in half and sank rapidly, taking most of her crew with her. In a single action lasting less than 4 hours, 1 Gato-Class submarine had destroyed 3 major tankers totaling 28,000 tons. The fuel they carried, enough to operate the Japanese combined fleet for a week, burned on the water or went to the bottom. USS Tang, commanded by Commander Richard O'Kane, achieved similar devastating results. Commissioned in October 1943, Tang completed 5 war patrols before being lost in October 1944. During those 5 patrols, Tang sank 24 ships totaling 93,000 tons, making O'Kane the most successful American submarine commander of the war. Tang's 4th patrol in June 1944 illustrated the cumulative impact of multiple Gato-Class submarines operating in coordinated patrol areas. On June 24, 1944, Tang intercepted a 6-ship convoy off the west coast of Honshu, Japan itself. The convoy consisted of 2 tankers, 3 cargo ships, and 1 destroyer escort. Tang tracked the convoy for 4 hours, waiting for optimal attack position. At 0200 hours, O'Kane fired 6 torpedoes at the 2 tankers from range 1,800 yards. 5 torpedoes hit. Both tankers, Tamon Maru No. 5 and Takatori Maru No. 1, exploded and sank within minutes. The destroyer escort immediately counterattacked, dropping 37 depth charges over Tang's position. O'Kane dove deep, rigged for silent running, and used a temperature layer at 270 feet to mask Tang's sonar signature. The destroyer searched for 3 hours, dropping occasional depth charges, but failed to locate Tang precisely. At 0530 hours, the destroyer withdrew to rejoin the surviving convoy. O'Kane surfaced at 0600 hours, located the convoy by radar at 14,000 yards, and began pursuit. Tang remained surfaced all day, tracking the convoy from beyond visual range using radar, closing only when the convoy altered course away from coastal waters. At 2100 hours that night, Tang caught the convoy off Oshima Island. O'Kane fired 4 torpedoes at the 3 remaining cargo ships. 2 cargo ships, Tainan Maru and Ryue Maru, sank immediately. The third, Kaon Maru, took 1 hit but remained afloat. The destroyer escort, alerted by the explosions, charged toward Tang's last known position. O'Kane dove, evaded the destroyer using radical course changes and silent running, then surfaced 2 hours later to pursue Kun Maru. The damaged freighter, unable to make more than 6 knots, attempted to reach shallow coastal waters where Tang could not follow. O'Kane intercepted her at 0100 hours on June 25th and fired 2 torpedoes from 900 yards. Both hit. Kaunmaru sunk stern first, her bow rising vertically before she slipped beneath the waves. In 31 hours, Tang had destroyed 6 ships, totaling 19,000 tons, reduced a Japanese convoy to scattered lifeboats and wreckage, and escaped without damage despite persistent counterattacks. This was not exceptional performance for a Gato-Class submarine with an experienced commander. 50 Gato-Class boats operating simultaneously across the Pacific, each achieving similar results, generated catastrophic cumulative losses for Japan's merchant marine. The statistics documented the acceleration of Japanese shipping losses as more Gato-Class submarines deployed. In 1942, American submarines sank 180 Japanese merchant ships, totaling 568,000 tons. The majority of these sinkings occurred in the last quarter after the first Gato-Class boats reached combat zones. In 1943, with 77 Gato-Class submarines operational, sinkings increased to 335 ships, totaling 1,800,000 tons. In 1944, with over 120 Gato-Class and Balao-Class submarines operating, sinkings reached 600 ships, totaling 2,700,000 tons. By late 1944, Japanese merchant shipping losses exceeded new construction by a factor of 10. Japan's shipyards, working at maximum capacity with diminishing resources, could build perhaps 300,000 tons of merchant shipping per year. American submarines were sinking that much tonnage every 6 weeks. The mathematics were inexorable. Japanese merchant capacity declined steadily from 6 million tons in December 1941 to under 2 million tons by August 1945. The ships that survived did so by hiding in port, not daring to sail into waters patrolled by submarines that controlled the seas absolutely. The human cost of the Gato-Class campaign extended beyond sunk tonnage and strategic consequences. Japanese merchant sailors died by the thousands, trapped in burning ships, drowning in oil-covered water, or succumbing to exposure in lifeboats that drifted for weeks without rescue. The Imperial Navy maintained no effective rescue service for merchant sailors, viewing them as expendable civilians whose survival mattered less than conserving destroyers and patrol craft for fleet operations. After USS Barb sank the transport Madras Maru off the China coast in September 1944, survivors reported that the ship carried 1,200 passengers, mostly soldiers being transported to reinforce garrisons in Manchuria. When torpedoes struck, the ship's crew abandoned ship immediately in the few lifeboats available, leaving the soldiers below decks. As Madras Maru sunk, over 800 soldiers drowned, trapped in compartments with locked hatches, or simply unable to reach the upper decks in the confusion. Those who made it to the water found no rescue craft approaching. Japanese destroyers in the area made no attempt to recover survivors, continuing their anti-submarine search instead. USS Barb's commander, Eugene Fluckey, surfaced after the destroyers departed and recovered 12 survivors, including 2 merchant sailors who provided information about convoy routes and schedules. Fluckey offered food, water, and basic medical care before departing. The survivors later reported that the American submarine crew treated them with more humanity than their own navy had shown, a realization that shocked men who had been taught Americans were barbaric and cruel. Similar scenes repeated across the Pacific as Gato-Class submarines sank ship after ship. Many American submarine commanders, operating under unrestricted submarine warfare orders that required no quarter for enemy shipping, nevertheless surfaced after attacks to offer survivors directions to the nearest land or to radio the position of lifeboats to Japanese rescue services. These gestures of humanity contrasted sharply with Japanese naval doctrine that considered merchant sailors expendable and submarine survivors unworthy of rescue operations that might endanger warships. The operational flexibility of the Gato-Class design allowed submarines to adapt tactics based on target types and defensive measures. Against heavily escorted convoys with multiple destroyer escorts, submarines used pack tactics developed in 1943. 3 or 4 boats coordinated attacks, with one boat drawing away escorts, while others attacked the vulnerable merchant ships. Against lightly escorted or unescorted targets, submarines operated alone, maximizing time on station by avoiding coordination requirements. USS Harder, commanded by Commander Samuel Dealey, demonstrated the effectiveness of Gato-Class submarines against Japanese anti-submarine forces themselves. During Harder's fifth patrol in June 1944, Dealey encountered multiple Japanese destroyers, searching for American submarines near Tawi-Tawi in the Philippines. Rather than evading, Dealey attacked the destroyers directly, using Harder's speed and maneuverability to advantage. Between June 6 and 10, 1944, Harder sank 3 Japanese destroyers in 5 days. The destroyer Minadzuki went down on June 6 after 3 torpedo hits. The destroyer Hayanami sank on June 7 with 2 torpedo hits. The destroyer Tanikaze was destroyed on June 10 with 3 hits. These were not obsolete pre-war destroyers, but modern fleet escorts built in the late 1930s with effective anti-submarine equipment. Dealey's tactics demonstrated boldness that bordered on recklessness but reflected confidence born from experience. When destroyers approached to depth-charge Harder's position, Dealey turned toward them rather than away, closing to point-blank range where destroyer sonar lost effectiveness. At ranges under 1,000 yards, Dealey fired full salvos of 6 torpedoes, then dove deep as torpedoes ran. The destroyers, detecting torpedoes incoming at close range, attempted to turn and evade but lacked time. Multiple hits broke their backs and sent them to the bottom in minutes. The psychological impact on Japanese anti-submarine forces proved significant. Destroyer captains, already frustrated by their inability to locate and kill American submarines, now faced submarines that hunted them. Reports reached fleet headquarters of destroyers sunk by submarines they had been actively pursuing. This inverted the predator-prey relationship and made destroyer crews increasingly reluctant to pursue aggressive anti-submarine tactics. By late 1944, Japanese destroyers assigned to convoy escort missions often failed to pursue submarine contacts, preferring to remain with the convoy and hoping their presence alone would deter attack. This passive approach proved completely ineffective against aggressive Gato-Class commanders who viewed destroyer escorts as minor obstacles, easily evaded, or, if necessary, attacked directly. The fuel crisis, gripping Japan by 1944, demonstrated the strategic impact of the Gato-Class submarine campaign. Japan's petroleum production from the Dutch East Indies, Borneo, and Sumatra totaled approximately 25 million barrels per year at peak. This covered perhaps 70% of military requirements, with the deficit made up from stockpiles accumulated before the war. Transportation required tankers moving continuously between production sites and Japan, covering routes patrolled increasingly by American submarines. In 1943, Japan imported 12 million barrels of oil. In 1944, despite desperate efforts to expand, tanker construction, imports fell to 5 million barrels. In the first 7 months of 1945, imports totaled less than 1 million barrels. The cause was simple. Submarines, primarily Gato-Class boats, were sinking tankers faster than Japan could build replacements. Each tanker sunk represented not just lost cargo, but lost capacity to transport future shipments. The consequences cascaded through every aspect of Japan's war effort. The combined fleet, lacking fuel for training exercises, kept capital ships in harbour. Pilots trained on minimal flight hours, reducing combat effectiveness catastrophically. The kamikaze strategy adopted in late 1944 reflected not just desperation, but acknowledgement that Japan could no longer afford the fuel for conventional training that produced competent pilots. Better to crash minimally trained pilots into enemy ships than waste fuel attempting to train them to standards that fuel shortages made impossible to achieve. Army operations in China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands suffered equally. Trucks sat immobilized for lack of fuel. Aircraft stayed grounded. Training exercises were cancelled. Offensive operations planned to recapture lost territory were postponed indefinitely, then cancelled as fuel allocations shrank to levels, supporting only defensive operations. By early 1945, Japanese forces throughout the empire operated on fuel rations insufficient for anything beyond survival. Industrial production collapsed, oil refineries shut down, chemical plants closed. Aluminum smelters, which required enormous electrical power, were shuttered as hydroelectric plants reduced output for lack of lubricating oil. The manufacturing base that had produced aircraft, ships, tanks, and weapons ground to a halt not because of bombing, but because submarines had cut the oil lifeline from the southern resource area. The civilian impact proved equally devastating. By 1945, Japanese cities experienced regular blackouts as power generation declined. Hospitals operated without heat in winter. Transportation systems shut down as trains and buses lacked fuel. The rationing system, already severe, collapsed as distribution networks failed without fuel for trucks. Urban populations faced genuine starvation as rice shipments from Korea and Formosa ceased when coastal shipping became too dangerous. The irony was bitter. Japan had gone to war to secure resources, particularly oil, from Southeast Asia. The southern resource area had been captured successfully. Oil fields in the Dutch East Indies produced at capacity. Rubber plantations in Malaya yielded their harvest. Rice paddies in Burma and Indochina provided surplus grain. All the resources existed. But American submarines, primarily Gato-Class boats numbering fewer than 200 at any given time, had cut the maritime transportation system so thoroughly that resources might as well have been on the moon. Japanese attempts to counter the submarine threat proved consistently inadequate. The Imperial Navy had neglected anti-submarine warfare in favor of preparing for decisive fleet battle. Destroyer escorts, purpose-built ships optimized for convoy protection, were not available in sufficient numbers. Most Japanese destroyers were fleet types designed for surface combat and torpedo attacks, pressed into escort duty for which they were ill-suited. Sonar equipment on Japanese destroyers lagged behind American and British technology. Japanese depth charges, while effective when accurately placed, relied on visual sightings for targeting, since most escort vessels lacked effective sonar. Against submerged submarines running silent, escorts could only guess locations and drop charges, hoping for lucky hits. This rarely succeeded. Radar, which American destroyers used to locate surfaced submarines at night, remained rare on Japanese escorts throughout the war. American submarines routinely surfaced at night to recharge batteries and track convoys by radar. Japanese escorts without radar could not detect surfaced submarines beyond visual range, allowing American boats to shadow convoys all night while remaining safely beyond visual distance. The patrol aircraft situation proved equally problematic. Land-based patrol bombers that might have provided convoy air cover were concentrated protecting fleet anchorages rather than merchant shipping routes. The few aircraft assigned to convoy protection lacked effective anti-submarine weapons. Japanese depth charges for aircraft were too light, typically weighing 60 pounds compared to American depth charges weighing 350 pounds. These light charges rarely damaged submarines even with direct hits. More fundamentally, Japanese anti-submarine doctrine focused on reactive responses rather than proactive convoy protection. When convoys were attacked, escorts responded with depth charge patterns that seldom achieved results. But convoys sailed without systematic air cover, without advance clearance of patrol areas, without the integrated command structure that allowed American and British forces to coordinate surface escorts and patrol aircraft effectively. The result was predictable. Japanese convoys sailed into waters, patrolled by American submarines, were attacked, lost ships, and continued sailing while survivors were left behind. The pattern repeated hundreds of times as Gato-Class submarines operated with impunity across the Western Pacific, sinking ships faster than Japan could replace them and without suffering losses remotely proportional to the destruction they inflicted. Of the 77 Gato-Class submarines commissioned during the war, 19 were lost to all causes, 13 were sunk by Japanese anti-submarine forces, 3 were lost to operational accidents, 3 were lost to friendly fire or unknown causes. A loss rate of 25% was significant but acceptable given the strategic results achieved. Each Gato-Class submarine lost had typically completed multiple patrols and sunk dozens of ships before her destruction. The exchange ratio overwhelmingly favored American submarines. USS Wahoo, which had destroyed Ikoku Maru in March 1943, completed 6 devastating patrols before being lost in October 1943 in the Sea of Japan. During those 6 patrols, Wahoo sank 20 ships totaling 60,000 tons, including the aforementioned Ikoku Maru and numerous tankers and cargo vessels. When Wahoo was finally sunk by Japanese anti-submarine forces, she had already inflicted losses worth dozens of times her construction cost. This calculus applied across the Gato-Class force. Each submarine represented an investment of roughly $4 million in 1943 dollars. Each ton of Japanese merchant shipping sunk represented lost cargo, lost military supplies, and lost strategic mobility worth multiples of the submarine's cost. The industrial exchange ratio favored submarines overwhelmingly, making them the most cost-effective weapons system in the American arsenal. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, the cumulative impact of the Gato-Class submarine campaign had fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Pacific. Japan's merchant fleet had been reduced from 6 million tons to under 1 million tons of operational shipping. The economy had collapsed. The military, isolated on distant islands and unable to receive supplies or reinforcements, could offer only token resistance to American advances. The home islands faced starvation. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki provided the immediate catalyst for surrender. But Japan was already defeated economically and militarily by submarines that had strangled the empire's maritime lifelines so thoroughly that continuation of the war had become impossible, regardless of Japan's willingness to fight. The weapons existed. The soldiers remained willing to die. But without oil, without food, without raw materials transported by ships that no longer sailed because submarines controlled the seas, Japan simply could not continue. The Gato-Class submarines, built in American shipyards by the hundreds, crewed by volunteers who endured conditions that tested human endurance, and commanded by aggressive officers who learned their deadly trade through experience, had achieved what strategic bombing and surface naval battles could not. They had strangled an empire. They had cut the maritime arteries that connected Japan's scattered possessions into a coherent whole. They had demonstrated that wars are won not just through spectacular battles captured in headlines, but through the grinding attrition of logistics and transportation that receive less glory but determine outcomes more certainly. Japanese commanders, who had dismissed early reports of American submarine activity as exaggerated or coincidental, learned too late that the Americans had built not dozens but hundreds of submarines specifically designed to control the Pacific. The vast ocean that Japanese planners had believed would protect their shipping became a killing ground, where Gato-Class submarines hunted methodically, sinking ship after ship, convoy after convoy, until nothing remained but wreckage floating on the water and the scattered survivors of a merchant marine that had been destroyed so thoroughly that recovery proved impossible. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.